Ladies and gentlemen, success is not an accident. It's not simply luck or talent. At its core, success is a reflection of how well you can shape and rewire your brain to work for you instead of against you. The human brain is not a fixed machine. It's dynamic, adaptive, and constantly changing. This property, called neuroplasticity, means that your thoughts, behaviors, and habits sculpt the very structure of your brain. In other words, you are not stuck with the brain you woke up with this morning. You have the ability to change it deliberately. All right? You want me to expand the first keynote, neuroplasticity is the foundation of change, into about 700 words, written in a continuous flow, without subheadings or an explicit ending closing line. Here's the expanded keynote in a style that feels like Andrew Huberman's delivery. The human brain is not fixed. For a long time, people believed that after a certain age the brain becomes rigid, its wiring set in place, and that personality, abilities, and even intelligence were unchangeable. But neuroscience has shown us something radically different. The brain is plastic. It reshapes itself in response to what we do, what we think, and what we focus on. This ability is called neuroplasticity. Think of it as the most powerful mechanism we have for change, growth, and success. Every action you take, every thought you repeat, every experience you immerse yourself in is literally leaving a physical footprint in your brain. The neurons that fire together begin to wire together. Connections that are used frequently get stronger, faster, and more efficient. Connections that are ignored or neglected begin to weaken and eventually disappear. This means the story of who you are today is not a permanent story. It's simply the current state of your brain's wiring. And because wiring can change, so can you. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen equally all the time. There are windows when your brain is primed to change. These windows often open when you are highly focused, when you experience something emotionally powerful, or when you place yourself just outside your comfort zone. In those moments, your brain releases certain chemicals like acetylcholine and dopamine that act as signals saying, "Pay attention, this matters, remember this." These chemical states mark experiences as important, and they are what allow new connections to be formed at a faster rate. So when you decide you want to change your behavior, learn a skill, or pursue a new direction in life, what you are really doing is leveraging this biology. You're using neuroplasticity as a tool, but the brain is economical. It doesn't change simply because you wish it to. Desire is not enough. The changes come from repetition and intensity. Each time you engage in a behavior with focus, you are telling your brain, strengthen this connection. The more often you do this, the more myelin builds around those neural pathways, which makes them faster and more automatic. This is why habits feel difficult at first, almost unnatural, but become effortless over time. The discomfort is simply your brain trying to rewire itself. Persistence is what transforms effort into automaticity. Neuroplasticity demands energy up front, but it pays dividends later in the form of efficiency. Another important aspect of neuroplasticity is pruning. People often think rewiring only means adding new connections, but equally important is the removal of unused ones. If you continually engage in negative thought patterns, your brain strengthens those circuits. But if you interrupt them and consistently redirect your attention, the unused connections weaken. Over time, they fade. This is how you can literally unlearn unhelpful patterns. Success is not only about building new skills, it's about letting go of old ones that no longer serve you. Neuroplasticity is the mechanism for both. Sleep plays a critical role in this process. During deep sleep, your brain replays patterns of activity that occurred during the day. It consolidates learning, strengthens useful connections, and prunes away the irrelevant ones. Without adequate rest, the rewiring process is incomplete. You might work hard during the day, but it's during the night that your brain decides which changes to keep. This is why prioritizing sleep is not just about feeling rested. It's about making sure your brain locks in the very changes you've been working toward. One of the most fascinating aspects of neuroplasticity is that it doesn't distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined. Mental rehearsal, visualization, and focused practice can all activate the same neural circuits as actual behavior. This means you can accelerate learning and growth by engaging your mind even when your body cannot. Athletes, musicians, and high performers have used this principle for decades, and now science has validated why it works. The brain encodes imagined experiences almost as if they were real, strengthening those pathways and preparing you for action. The implication of all this is profound. Your brain is a living, adapting organ that reflects what you consistently expose it to. Success is not about waiting for the right conditions, the right motivation, or the right talent. It's about deliberately choosing the inputs you give your brain. Every day, you are either reinforcing old wiring or creating new wiring. You are either staying the same or becoming something different. Neuroplasticity is always at work, whether you're aware of it or not. The key is to take control of the process, to guide it instead of letting it run on autopilot. When you understand that your brain is changeable, that it responds to focused effort, that it encodes meaning and emotion, and that it requires repetition and rest, you begin to see that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is not as rigid as it seems. It's simply a matter of wiring. Stress is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human biology. Many people think of stress as purely negative, something to avoid at all costs, a force that drains energy and weakens health. But stress, when harnessed correctly, is one of the most powerful tools the brain and body have for adaptation and growth. The truth is that stress is not the problem. It is our relationship to it that determines whether it becomes destructive or transformative. Stress is a biological signal. When you encounter something challenging or unfamiliar, your body releases adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate increases, your breathing quickens, your pupils dilate, and your mind sharpens. These are not signs of damage. They are signs that your system is preparing you to learn and to act. Stress creates the chemical environment in the brain that makes plasticity possible. It tells your nervous system, pay attention, something important is happening here. In fact, if you look at the moments in your life when you have changed the most, grown the most, or learned the fastest, chances are those moments were stressful. Think about learning a new skill, giving a big presentation, starting a new job, or pushing through a difficult workout. In those states of heightened alertness, your brain is flooded with neuromodulators that amplify focus and increase the likelihood of remembering and integrating the experience. Without stress, the brain remains in a comfortable, stable state, and while that feels good, it doesn't push the system to adapt. Growth requires a certain level of friction. Stress is the spark that opens the doorway to change. Of course, not all stress is equal. Chronic, unrelenting stress with no opportunity for recovery can be harmful. It can weaken the immune system, impair cognition, and even damage motivation. But short bursts of stress, experienced in a controlled way and followed by rest, are the ideal recipe for rewiring the brain. The key is to recognize the difference between destructive stress and constructive stress. Constructive stress is the kind that comes from deliberate challenge, from stretching beyond your comfort zone, from doing something meaningful that demands more than what you are used to giving. When you place yourself in these conditions, you are signaling to your brain and body that adaptation is necessary. Over time, this builds resilience, grit, and capacity. What's fascinating is that the brain remembers not just the stress itself, but how you respond to it. If you repeatedly interpret stress as a threat, your brain wires associations of fear and avoidance. But if you frame stress as a challenge, as an opportunity, your brain wires resilience into your circuits. Studies show that simply changing your interpretation of stress can alter the physiological response in your body. Instead of cortisol creating wear and tear, it can enhance performance. Instead of adrenaline spiraling into anxiety, it can sharpen focus and readiness. This means the story you tell yourself in the moment of stress actually becomes part of your wiring. Stress, combined with perception, is what forges the pathways of resilience. Another important point is that stress enhances learning because it heightens neuroplasticity. During stressful experiences, the brain marks information with a kind of highlighter pen, saying, "Remember this?" This is why stressful moments in life tend to be more memorable. The brain wants to retain what happened so that you can use it as a reference for the future. This mechanism is survival-based, but in modern contexts, it can be directed toward growth. When you push yourself in a workout, tackle a new skill, or give a difficult speech, the stress you feel is tagging those moments as important, which means your brain is far more likely to adapt from them. Without stress, those same experiences would carry less weight and would fade quickly. It is also worth noting that stress tolerance can be trained. The more often you place yourself in stressful yet manageable situations, the more adaptable your nervous system becomes. Cold exposure, high-intensity exercise, public speaking, learning under pressure. All of these are ways of teaching your brain and body that stress is not something to fear, but something to use. Each time you do this, you raise the threshold of what you can handle, and your system becomes more efficient at returning to baseline afterward. This ability to activate stress when needed and then recover quickly is one of the clearest markers of long-term success. So, stress is not an obstacle to be eliminated. It is a resource to be managed. It is the biological lever that tells your system when it is time to grow. It sharpens your focus, accelerates learning, and strengthens resilience. When you shift your perspective and begin to see stress as a tool, you stop avoiding it and start using it. The discomfort of stress is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that your brain and body are preparing to change. Focus is the gateway to change in the brain. Every second, the nervous system is bombarded with sensory information, sounds, sights, feelings, thoughts, and yet only a fraction of it leaves a mark. The reason is that the brain only rewires when attention is directed. What you focus on is what gets strengthened, while what you ignore begins to fade. In this way, Focus acts like a sculptor's tool, carving the pathways that define your abilities, your habits, and your identity. When you are distracted, the signals in the brain are weak, scattered, and inconsistent. But when you bring your full attention to something, those same signals become strong, synchronized, and precise. Neurons that fire together under the force of attention begin to wire together, which is how long-term changes are laid down. The biology behind this is striking. When you focus on a task, your brain releases acetylcholine from specific neurons in the basal forebrain. This chemical doesn't spread everywhere. It acts like a spotlight, marking certain synapses for change while leaving others untouched. In essence, focus tells the brain this connection matters. Reinforce it. Without acetylcholine, activity in the brain might happen, but it won't be tagged as important, and therefore it won't last. This explains why you can skim through material half-heartedly and barely remember it, yet recall with clarity something you studied in a deeply attentive state. The brain encodes what you pay attention to, not what you merely encounter. Focus is also intimately tied to dopamine, the neuromodulator of motivation and reward. When you pursue something with focus, dopamine is released in small pulses as you make progress, reinforcing the effort. This system is what makes the act of deep concentration feel both demanding and rewarding. It creates a feedback loop. The more focused you are, the more dopamine you release, and the more motivated you feel to continue. This is why flow states, those periods when you are completely absorbed in what you are doing, feel so powerful. They are not just psychological, they are deeply biological. Your brain is literally bathing in the chemistry that makes rewiring faster and more efficient. But focus does not come easily in a world full of distractions. Every notification, every fragmented thought, every pull of multitasking scatters the spotlight of attention and weakens the very circuits you are trying to build. If you attempt to learn, work, or grow while distracted, you are essentially splitting the sculptor's tool into pieces, dulling its edge and spreading effort across too many channels. The result is shallow encoding, weak connections, and very little long-term change. By contrast, protecting your focus, setting aside time free of interruptions, working in deliberate blocks, and fully immersing yourself in the task creates conditions where the brain can engage in deep plasticity. This is why focus practice is far more valuable than hours of distracted repetition. 10 minutes of true focus can be more impactful than an hour of divided attention. Another important dimension of focus is the role of errors. When you concentrate intensely and make mistakes, the brain registers those errors with a surge of norepinephrine, another neuromodulator linked to alertness. That surge acts as a signal that something unexpected happened, sharpening your attention even further and increasing the chances that you will correct and remember it. In other words, errors made under focus are not failures, but essential triggers for rewiring. This is why learning feels effortful and sometimes uncomfortable. The struggle is the signal that your brain is actively reshaping itself. Without focus, those same errors might pass unnoticed, leaving circuits unchanged. Focus also interacts with emotion. When you deeply engage in something that matters to you, the emotional weight intensifies the effect of attention. If you connect the task to a purpose, whether it is achieving mastery, helping others, or building your future, the combination of focus and meaning amplifies plasticity. The brain is not a cold machine. It encodes what carries significance. Focus by itself drives change, but focus layered with emotional relevance accelerates it. This is why people tend to remember emotionally charged moments with such clarity. The brain fused attention with meaning, locking the memory in place. Training focus is like training a muscle. At first, it may be difficult to hold attention for more than a few minutes, but with practice, the circuits responsible for concentration strengthen. Over time, your capacity to sustain focus increases, and with it, your ability to rewire your brain. Simple practices like setting clear goals, breaking tasks into defined intervals, and deliberately returning to the task after distraction all contribute to this training. Each time you redirect your wandering attention, you are strengthening the very circuits that allow you to focus longer in the future. The essence is that focus is not just a psychological preference. It is the biological requirement for rewiring. It determines what the brain decides to keep and what it allows to fade. Without focus, experiences are fleeting and leave little trace. With focus, they become the building blocks of who you are becoming. The architecture of your brain is not built in a single day or by a single event. It is constructed gradually through repetition, through the things you do consistently, and through the patterns you follow over and over again. Every habit you practice leaves an imprint on your nervous system, strengthening some circuits while allowing others to weaken. This means that your habits are not just behaviors, they are literally the blueprints for your brain's structure. Each time you perform an action, neurons fire in specific patterns, and with enough repetition, those patterns become the default wiring. What begins as effort slowly turns into automaticity, and what once felt difficult becomes second nature. The beauty and challenge of this process is that the brain does not distinguish between helpful and harmful habits. It wires in whatever you repeat. This is why daily habits are so powerful. They operate beneath the level of conscious decision making, but they are what shape who you become. If you begin each day checking your phone, your brain is learning to crave external stimulation and distraction first thing in the morning. If you begin your day with movement, with focused work, or with deliberate stillness, your brain is learning to associate mornings with clarity and direction. Over weeks and months, those choices accumulate, not only shaping behavior, but sculpting the very circuits that determine your default state. Habits are the architects of identity because the brain internalizes them, turning fleeting actions into lasting traits. The mechanism behind this is repetition-driven plasticity. Each time you repeat an action, your brain strengthens the synapses involved in that behavior, adding layers of myelin to make the signal faster and more reliable. This is why practice makes things easier. The brain is literally reducing friction in the circuits that support that behavior. At the same time, when you neglect certain behaviors, those circuits weaken and eventually get pruned away. In this sense, habits are a vote for the kind of brain you want to build. Every repetition is like laying down another brick in the architecture of your nervous system. Over time, the structure becomes solid and the effort required to maintain it decreases. What makes habits especially powerful is that they work on both conscious and unconscious levels. You may consciously decide to develop a new skill or exercise routine, but over time, the brain moves those patterns into deeper regions that run automatically. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision making, eventually hands over control to more primitive systems that can run without thought. This is efficient because it frees up mental resources, but it also means that habits, good or bad, become deeply ingrained. Once embedded, they guide behavior without needing constant intention. This is why changing a habit feels so difficult. It requires not only building new pathways, but also weakening the old ones that have been reinforced for years. Daily habits also interact with motivation and reward systems. When you complete a habit, no matter how small, your brain releases dopamine, reinforcing the loop. This reward signal says, "Do this again," which is how habits get locked in. If you design your habits so that they bring small wins, whether it is a sense of progress, a check mark on a list, or simply the satisfaction of completion, you are leveraging the brain's reward circuitry to reinforce the architecture you want. Small, consistent victories matter more than occasional bursts of effort, because the brain is shaped by what you do regularly, not by what you do rarely. The cumulative effect of daily habits is staggering. Consider someone who chooses to read for 20 minutes each day. In the beginning, it is a small action, but over months and years the brain adapts, becoming more skilled at comprehension, retention, and focus. Circuits for attention grow stronger, and the ability to learn accelerates. Now contrast that with someone who spends that same daily period scrolling through distractions. Their brain wires itself for novelty seeking, for shallow engagement, for fragmented focus. Both people are practicing habits, and both are reshaping their brains, but in very different directions. The architecture being built is the direct outcome of those choices. What makes this principle empowering is that you don't need massive change to redirect your brain. You need consistent, daily actions that align with who you want to become. Each day is an opportunity to strengthen the wiring that supports success or to reinforce the wiring that holds you back. The brain does not care about your intentions, only your actions. Repeated enough, those actions become the architecture of your life. Rest is not the opposite of progress. It is a critical component of it. The brain is an organ that thrives on cycles of activity and recovery, and without both, the process of rewiring cannot take place. Most people assume that growth happens only when they are awake and actively practicing, but the truth is that much of the brain's change occurs during periods of rest and especially during sleep. When you are deeply focused on learning a skill, building a habit, or overcoming a challenge, you are putting stress on the neural circuits involved. They become active, and they begin to form new connections, but those connections are fragile at first. What determines whether they are kept, strengthened, or discarded happens later, when the brain is allowed to rest. During recovery, the nervous system replays patterns of activity, consolidates information, and decides what to preserve. Sleep is the most powerful form of recovery. In deep sleep, neurons fire in rhythmic patterns that replay what you practiced during the day. It is as though the brain is rehearsing, strengthening the useful connections, and pruning away the irrelevant ones. This process stabilizes learning so that it moves from short-term, unstable traces into long-term, reliable wiring. Without sleep, even the most focused practice can fade quickly because the consolidation step never occurs. The brain needs the alternating cycle of effort and rest to turn fragile circuits into lasting architecture. REM sleep adds another dimension by integrating emotions and experiences weaving them into the broader framework of memory. This is why sleep after learning or training not only makes recall better, but also makes insights and problem solving more likely. But recovery is not limited to sleep. Periods of deliberate rest while awake also play a key role. Short breaks, quiet reflection, or even simple deep breathing allow the nervous system to reset its levels of neuromodulators like norepinephrine and dopamine. When these chemicals are balanced, the brain can engage in learning again with renewed focus. If they remain depleted from constant effort, attention falters and plasticity diminishes. This is why studying or working for hours without pause often leads to diminishing returns. It is not because the material has become harder, it is because the brain's chemistry needs recovery before it can re-engage effectively. By alternating between focus and rest, you maximize the brain's ability to adapt. Rest also extends to physical recovery. Exercise, for example, places stress on the body and the nervous system, and it is in the hours and days after the workout that adaptation occurs. Muscles repair, circuits refine, and skills deepen. The same principle applies to mental performance. Intense focus and challenge create the conditions for change, but the actual rewiring requires time away from the effort. This interplay between exertion and rest is not optional. It is the way the nervous system was designed to operate. The people who learn the fastest or perform the best are often those who respect recovery as much as they respect practice. Another fascinating element of recovery is the role of non-sleep deep rest practices such as meditation, yoga nidra, or even simply lying quietly with closed eyes. These states allow the brain to drop into patterns of activity similar to early sleep stages, which can accelerate recovery and consolidation. Studies have shown that even a brief session of such rest can restore focus, improve memory, and enhance the brain's capacity for plasticity. This means that recovery can be woven into the day in small doses, not just confined to the nighttime. By integrating rest intentionally, you are giving your brain more opportunities to lock in the changes you are working so hard to create. Emotionally, rest also provides the space to integrate meaning. When you step back from constant effort, the brain is free to process experiences on a deeper level, attaching significance and weaving them into your identity. This is why insights often arrive in moments of relaxation, while walking or just before sleep. The subconscious mind continues to work with the material even when you are not actively directing it. By respecting rest, you are allowing your brain to do its hidden work of connection and integration. The modern world often glorifies constant hustle, the idea that progress comes from never stopping, always grinding, and outworking everyone else. But biology does not work that way. The nervous system requires cycles. Push too hard without recovery, and the circuits of stress overwhelm the circuits of learning. Build in rest, and the same effort produces greater results. Rest is not weakness, and it is not wasted time. It is the environment in which the rewiring you worked for is made permanent. Emotions are not just fleeting feelings that color our experiences. They are powerful biological signals that tell the brain what to pay attention to and what to remember. The nervous system is constantly filtering through vast amounts of information, most of which is discarded because it is not deemed important. What determines importance is often the presence of emotional intensity. When something carries emotional weight, whether it is excitement, joy, fear, or even frustration, The brain releases neuromodulators like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin that act as chemical tags. These tags highlight certain experiences, strengthening the likelihood that they will be encoded into long-term memory and integrated into neural circuits. In this way, emotions act as accelerators of plasticity. They don't just make experiences more vivid, they increase the probability that those experiences will change you. Consider the way you remember certain events in your life. Many of the most vivid memories are attached to strong emotions. The day you achieved something important, the moment you experienced a painful setback, the first time you felt deep love or deep fear. These moments are etched into the brain, not just because of the events themselves, but because the emotional chemicals flooding your system told your nervous system. This matters. Don't forget it. On the other hand, neutral experiences, even if repeated, are often forgotten quickly because they lacked the emotional signal that marks them as significant. This shows how emotions prioritize what the brain rewires and what it discards. This principle can be deliberately applied to learning and success. When you attach meaning and emotion to what you are doing, you greatly enhance the rate of learning. If you study a subject or train a skill in a detached, mechanical way, progress is slow. But if you connect the practice to a personal purpose, a goal that excites you, or even a challenge that frustrates you, the emotional engagement releases neuromodulators that boost focus and increase plasticity. This is why passion and purpose are such strong drivers of achievement. They are not just psychological motivators, they are biological amplifiers of rewiring. The brain is far more likely to change in response to something that matters to you emotionally than to something you approach without feeling. Negative emotions, though often seen as obstacles, can also serve as powerful accelerators of learning. Frustration, for example, signals that you are pushing against the edge of your current ability. That emotional discomfort triggers the release of norepinephrine, heightening alertness and driving the brain to adjust circuits. This is why mistakes made in states of frustration often become lasting lessons. The key is not to avoid these emotions, but to channel them, to recognize that they are part of the process of change. Fear operates similarly. When you step into situations that scare you, speaking in front of others, taking a bold risk, exposing yourself to potential failure, the emotional arousal tells your brain this experience is critical. If you persist through it, the rewiring is powerful and lasting. Positive emotions, of course, play an equally strong role. Dopamine, released when you feel progress, satisfaction, or excitement, reinforces behaviors and encourages repetition. Every small win in the direction of your goals triggers this system, and those chemical signals say to your brain, keep going, this is good. By designing your habits and practices to include small markers of progress, you can leverage dopamine to accelerate the learning process. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. Emotion drives learning, learning drives progress, progress drives emotion, and the loop strengthens itself. Another important dimension is that emotions integrate experiences with identity. When something is emotionally charged, it doesn't just create a memory, it reshapes how you see yourself. A powerful success can rewire circuits of confidence, embedding the belief that you are capable. A painful failure, if processed correctly, can rewire circuits of resilience, embedding the capacity to endure and adapt. The emotional weight of these experiences makes the wiring deeper, shifting not only what you know, but who you believe you are. This is why transformation is rarely purely intellectual. It requires emotional engagement to take hold at the level of identity. Even imagined emotional experiences can accelerate learning. Visualization combined with emotional intensity activates many of the same circuits as real experiences. If you vividly imagine success with the feelings of pride, energy, and determination that accompany it, your brain encodes those pathways more strongly. If you imagine overcoming fear and connect to the emotional relief and strength on the other side, you are preparing your nervous system to respond in reality. The combination of mental rehearsal and emotional engagement is a powerful tool because the brain does not fully distinguish between vividly imagined and lived experience when emotions are involved. Emotions also enhance social learning. When you learn in the presence of others, when you feel connection, encouragement, or even competition, the emotional engagement amplifies plasticity. This is why group training, mentorship, and supportive communities are so effective. They are not just sources of information, but sources of emotional resonance that signal to your brain that the experiences within them are significant and worth encoding deeply. The essence is that emotions are not a distraction from learning or success. They are the very accelerators that make learning faster and success more lasting. They mark experiences with urgency, deepen focus, and bind memories into identity, ensuring that the changes in the brain are durable and meaningful.